February 1943. The air in Tunisia smelled of burned metal, flesh, and humiliation. Along the desolate Kasserine Pass, the U.S. Army's II Corps was not merely defeated, it was annihilated. It was a graveyard of ambitions, a funeral pyre for American innocence in the war. For Private Jimmy Riley, a farm boy from Indiana who had never seen anything bigger than a tractor, the desert had become hell. The blackened skeletons of Sherman and Grant tanks littered the landscape, their cannons pointing at the sky in a silent plea. All around them lay the bodies of his friends, hastily covered with blankets or simply left where they fell. The sound of battle had been replaced by an even more terrifying silence, the moan of the wind through the barrels of destroyed tanks, the buzzing of flies, and the muffled cries of the wounded still awaiting evacuation. They had been thrown into battle with inadequate equipment, disastrous leadership, and an overconfidence that was shattered at the first touch of German steel. The name on everyone's lips, whispered with a mixture of terror and grudging respect, was Rommel, the Desert Fox. To these green soldiers, he was not a man, but a force of nature, a phantom commanding legions of panzers that seemed invulnerable. Panic was a disease, and it had spread through the ranks like dysentery. The troops were demoralized, ragged, and terrified. They had lost nearly 10,000 men, almost 200 tanks, and had been pushed back 50 miles in a chaotic retreat. Confidence, a soldier's most precious commodity, had evaporated under the African sun. And to add insult to injury, their commander, Major General Lloyd Fredendall, had directed this catastrophe from a bomb-proof command bunker carved into a mountainside, 75 miles from the front. His leadership was as distant as it was ineffective. The Second Corps was broken, an army without a head, without a heart, and without hope. America's first great test of arms in the European theater had been an unmitigated disaster. The world was watching, and the enemy was gloating. On the other side of the hills, at the headquarters of Army Group Africa, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was savoring his last great victory. It was the culmination of a legend forged in the dust and heat of the Desert Fox, a tactical genius, a master of blitzkrieg who led from the front, often in a captured command vehicle, sharing the dangers of his men. His reputation was a weapon in itself. His enemies saw him as an almost superhuman adversary, capable of conjuring victories from thin air. His own troops, the legendary Africa Corps, worshipped him, following their charismatic leader with fanatical loyalty. Yet, the Rommel of March 1943 was not the same man who had swept the British across Libya. He was physically and mentally exhausted. A chronic illness plagued him, and disillusionment had settled into his soul. For months, he had pleaded with the High Command in Berlin for more men, more tanks, more fuel. His pleas had been ignored, resources diverted to the catastrophe at Stalingrad. His victory at Kasserine, though crushing, had reinforced his worst prejudice, a profound underestimation of his new enemy. To him, the American soldiers were abysmal, poorly trained, badly led, and cowardly. He had humiliated them with ease and did not expect them to recover anytime soon. His attention, his obsession, remained fixed on his old adversary, General Bernard Montgomery and his British Eighth Army, pressing from the south. The threat rebuilding to the west, in the ashes of the Second Corps, barely warranted his consideration. The Axis plan after Kasserine reflected this arrogance. Instead of exploiting the breakthrough and annihilating the Americans, the command, now split between Rommel and his cautious superior, von Arnim, opted for a more limited objective. They would launch a holding attack in a little-known valley called El Guettar. The goal was simple: to disrupt any American attempt to regroup and to protect the flank of their main defensive line, the Meroth Line. They believed it would be a cakewalk, a quick punch against an already broken foe. They did not know that the humiliation of Kasserine had unleashed a force they could not foresee. They did not know that a furious and embarrassed General Dwight D. Eisenhower was about to unleash his most ferocious and controversial bulldog on the wreckage of the II Corps. At Allied headquarters, Eisenhower made one of the toughest decisions of his career. He fired his friend, Lloyd Fredendall, and summoned the one man he believed could turn disaster into victory, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr. Patton was the antithesis of Fredendall. He was loud, profane, aggressive, and mystically believed he was the reincarnation of ancient warriors. His arrival at the 2-Corps command post on March 6, 1943, was like the explosion of a grenade in a library. He found utter disorganization, an atmosphere of defeat, and, what offended him most, an appalling lack of discipline. His reaction was instant and brutal. He instituted shock therapy. He ordered every soldier, without exception, to wear a steel helmet and regulation necktie at all times, even in rear areas. Nurses in the hospitals were not exempt. He patrolled the lines himself, fining officers $25 and enlisted men $10 for any infraction. He demanded that all men be clean-shaven daily. "A clean-shaven man is a proud man," he barked. He moved the headquarters from Fredendall's safe bunker out into the open, just miles from the front, where the sound of artillery was a constant reminder of the war. He believed a pint of sweat will save a gallon of blood, and he subjected his troops to a relentless training regimen. But his most important transformation was psychological. He assembled his officers, men whose eyes reflected defeat, and injected them with his own iron will. "Gentlemen," he proclaimed in his high, piercing voice, "tomorrow we attack. If we are not victorious, let no one come back alive." His mission, per Eisenhower's orders, was to get the 10th Corps ready for the offensive in just 10 days. Patton decided the best way to prepare for an attack was to attack first. He rejected any notion of a defensive posture. He drew up a simple, direct plan to hit the enemy at El Guettar with overwhelming violence. The objective was not just to take a piece of ground, it was to restore the honor of the United States Army and to kill Germans. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Patton, his personal nemesis, Erwin Rommel, was leaving Africa for good on March 9th on Hitler's direct order, due to his failing health. Command passed to General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, but the myth of Rommel was so powerful that his ghost remained. To Patton and to every American soldier, the enemy was still the Desert Fox. The coming battle was not just a tactical test, it was a duel of legends, a fight for the soul of an army. The stage was set for a confrontation no one expected. A reborn army, led by a warrior from another time, was about to clash with veteran panzer divisions in the arid hills of Tunisia. The story of how this battle became the forge of the modern American army is a testament to leadership and courage. To understand the anatomy of this crucial victory, to see every maneuver and feel the impact of every shell, subscribe and hit like, because the grave Patton dug in the desert was built with steel, fire, and an indomitable will. At dawn on March 23rd, the valley of El Guettar trembled. At 06 UM sharp, German artillery opened up, and under the cover of the explosions, 50 tanks of the 10th Panzer Division emerged from a gorge like a pack of steel predators. Their target, the positions of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division, the big red one. For the soldiers in the foxholes, the roar of the panzers. Maybach engines was a familiar, terrifying sound. It was the sound of Kasserine. Panic, a ghost that had never truly left, began to grip their throats. The American front line, held by infantry and a few anti-tank guns, bent and then broke. The Panzer IIIs and IVs, black crosses painted on their sides, rolled over machine gun positions and mortar pits. German infantry followed close behind, exploiting the breach. For a moment, it seemed that history was repeating itself, that the nightmare of Kasserine had returned to devour them. But Patton was not Fredendall, and the 1st Infantry Division was not a broken unit. They had prepared the ground. At 0745, the spearhead of the 10th Panzer drove straight into a massive, carefully concealed minefield. The explosions tore the tracks off the lead tanks, stopping the attack's momentum cold. The panzers behind were forced to halt or swerve, creating a traffic jam of armored vehicles, perfect targets. And that is when Patton unleashed hell, American artillery. The weapon Patton called the Queen of Battle opened fire with a fury and precision the Germans had never experienced from the Americans. Shells from 105mm and 155mm howitzers, perfectly coordinated by forward observers, rained down on the stalled tank formation. The valley filled with a deafening roar, with geysers of earth and metal shards. Then, from hidden positions on the hillsides, came the Revenge, the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion. One of the hardest-hit units at Kasserine sprang into action. Their vehicles, the M3 gun motor carriage, were little more than half-tracks with a 75mm gun mounted on the back. Their thin armor had earned them the grim nickname Purple Heart Boxes. But on this day, they used their speed and surprise to their advantage. Employing shoot-and-scoot tactics, they would pop out of cover, fire several armor-piercing rounds into the sides and rear of the panzers, and pull back before the enemy could respond. Alongside them, infantry teams with 57mm anti-tank guns joined the slaughter. Chaos seized the Germans, trapped in the minefield, hammered by artillery, and ambushed by tank destroyers. Their attack fell apart. In less than an hour, 30 of their 50 tanks were smoking ruins. The 10th Panzer Division, an elite unit of the Afrika Korps, retreated in complete disarray, leaving a trail of destruction behind them. Patton, observing the battle from an outpost, showed no emotion save for a cold satisfaction. He had made his point. His army could fight. In the afternoon, the Germans attempted a second attack, this time with infantry, but they were beaten back by the same curtain of artillery fire. By day's end, the El Guettar Valley was in American hands. The tide, at last, had begun to turn. The impact of the defeat on the German command was seismic. General von Broich, commander of the 10th Panzer, could not believe the reports. The loss of over 30 tanks in a single morning attack against the American amateurs was unthinkable. The backbone of his elite division had been fractured. German confidence in their armored superiority, a pillar of their military doctrine, was badly shaken. The myth of American incompetence, born in the easy victory of Kasserine, died that day in the dust of El Guettar. Captured German soldiers expressed their astonishment, not so much at the tenacity of the infantry, but at the terrifying accuracy and overwhelming volume of the American artillery. They had awakened an industrial giant that was now also learning to fight with intelligence and brutality. The strategic domino effect was immediate. General von Arnim, who had considered Patton's front a secondary concern, was forced to urgently divert crucial units, including air and infantry reinforcements, to contain the resurgent II Corps. Every soldier and every tank sent west to stop Patton was one less to face the mounting pressure from Montgomery's 8th Army at the Meerith Line. Patton's offensive at El Guettar, though tactically a local victory, became a strategic pivot. It tore a crack in the Axis fortress in Tunisia, a crack the Allies would ruthlessly exploit in the coming weeks. But the most profound consequence was psychological. For the American troops, El Guettar was a rebirth. Private Jimmy Riley and his comrades, who had cowered in their foxholes at the sight of the panzers, now stood over the smoking wrecks of those same tanks. Terror had been replaced by a hard, combat-forged confidence. They had faced Germany's best, the legendary veterans of the Afrika Korps, and they had beaten them. They had avenged the humiliation of Kasserine. They had proven to themselves and to the world that they could fight and win. In the course of a single bloody day, under the relentless leadership of Patton, the U.S. Army's II Corps had transformed from a terrified amateur into a hardened veteran. The battle for El Guettar raged on for days, with the Americans now on the offensive, pushing the Axis forces back hill by hill. On April 7th, in a historic moment, the forward patrols of Patton's II Corps linked up with the scouts of Montgomery's 8th Army. The encirclement was complete. The fate of the Axis forces in Africa was sealed. On May 13, 1943, the final resistance collapsed. Over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered, a haul of prisoners so massive it rivaled Stalingrad. Africa had been cleansed of the Axis. The victory came at a high cost. In the Tunisia campaign, the Americans suffered over 18,000 casualties, but the Axis losses were catastrophic, exceeding 600,000 killed, wounded, and captured. El Guettar was the crucible in which the modern United States Army was forged. It was the first major American land victory against Germany, an often overlooked turning point. The lessons learned there, under Patton's harsh tutelage, became the foundation for future success. The importance of iron discipline, the coordination of infantry, armor, and above all, the mastery of massed artillery, became the hallmark of the American way of war. Patton cemented his reputation as America's most formidable field commander, a man who could inspire troops and terrify the enemy. Though he never faced Rommel directly on the battlefield, by defeating his best units, Patton shattered the aura of invincibility that surrounded the Desert Fox. For the American soldiers, they had beaten Rommel, and that belief was all that mattered. From the ashes of humiliation at Kasserine, a new army arose, confident and lethal. The Battle of El Guettar was not just a victory in the desert, it was the first step on the long, bloody road that would lead through Sicily, across the beaches of Normandy, and finally, into the heart of Germany itself.